Welcome to Helping Teachers Thrive. Today I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Stephen Barron, a psychologist and author of Teaching with a Strength-Based Approach, How to Motivate Students and Build Relationships. Stephen's work focuses on empowering teachers to bring out the best in their students by shifting the focus from weaknesses to strengths. Welcome, Stephen. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Tim. It's a genuine pleasure, and thank you for having me on the program.
Now, would you mind, please, explaining what a strength-based approach in education is and why you believe it is so crucial for student success?
Well, a strength-based model, it's a model. It's a way of looking at students. And what it is, instead of looking at deficits and weaknesses and what's wrong with students or people, we want to look at what assets, resources, capabilities they have and how those can be nurtured, developed, and leveraged. And we want to be able to utilize those instead of reinventing the wheel every time. We want to be able to utilize those by first identifying them and then trying to determine methods of instruction that could tap into students using their abilities. And what we see is that following a strength-based model helps students become more confident. It helps them also recognize things about themselves that maybe they don't even realize about themselves. Gee, I didn't know I can do that, or I didn't know I had this ability to do this or that. And there are certain assumptions in the strength-based model that we use. One being that every student brings something to the table. Maybe we can't identify it, and depending on the needs of the student may or may not be readily available, but every student brings something, some asset, some resource that we could try to tap into. And what we try to do is identify it, as I said. And I think the point for me is, and I was a psychologist in a school setting for 30 years, so I've seen this, I work with teachers on it, is that what we see is how we view a student determines our view of reality. The assumptions we make of kids, the beliefs that we have, that will determine our interactions with them, and that will determine their perceptions of us as well. And to me, that is the most important thing. The message we give to a student. I think if the message is from day one, I'm your teacher, I'm thrilled to be your teacher, let's go on this journey together, let's do the best that we can be with each other, I really think that that is a powerful message that kids need to hear. And sometimes they don't. There was a study done many years ago by a psychologist named Robert Rosenthal. And in this study, it was done in New York City. He approached fifth grade teachers and randomly, and he had permission to do this, and he said, I'm a psychologist, I did cognitive assessments of particular students in your class, and these particular students are going to be your academic all-stars. They were exceedingly bright. And he went on to tell the teachers who these students were. And then Rosenthal had his team monitor the class for the school year. It was several teachers. And he would look at things like students' academic achievement, their behavioral, their social adjustment, the teachers' interactions with them. And what he found was that these students who were identified as intellectual all-stars had very good grades. They had very few behavioral issues, if any. The quality of the interaction between the teacher and the student was such that it was very positive. And it was a distinct difference in how the teachers related to these students compared to the kids that weren't in the study. So for the whole year goes on, and these identified students had a terrific year, academically and socially and behaviorally. And then, at the end of the school year, Rosenthal had to come clean and told his teachers, look, I never tested these kids. I randomly picked names off your roster. And I said I tested because I wanted to see how your expectations of the students would impact your work with them. And I don't know if the teachers were happy about that or not. And he was actually criticized at the time for misleading his subjects. But even if you take all that into account, it's still a very interesting finding that the teacher's assumptions, the teacher's beliefs of their students influenced not only how the teachers related to them, but how the students produced in the classroom. So I think the messages that we give kids is so critical and so important. And look, just like we're watching them, they're watching us, and they need to get that kind of feedback, I think, to help them be the best they can be.
And as teachers, we are supposed to instill our belief in those children to help them thrive and improve in lessons and classrooms academically, but also outside schools in terms of other skills, social skills. And our beliefs can, our values and our beliefs can really impact on them moving forwards. Now, with the strength-based teaching approach, how will this positively impact students, for example, who come from quite traumatic backgrounds?
That's a very good question. One of the it's interesting. There's a lot of misinformation about the strength-based model. A lot of assumptions people make about it that aren't valid. And one is that it's only for high-functioning kids, only for students that come from the students who come from intact families and already have skills established. They're the ones that's aimed for. But that's not really true. This is an approach that can work with students who have academic and cognitive challenges, that have behavioral challenges. Your question about students that come from difficult families. It's interesting because there was a survey I recently read in the United Kingdom, and it said that on average teachers spend over almost approximately 1,300 hours a year with students. It may vary based on upper level, lower level, elementary or secondary here in the States. And the amount of time that parents actually spend with their kids one-on-one, especially if they're working, is like 20 to 30 minutes a day. So teachers have a very powerful and unique position. And I think if a teacher conveys to a student, I believe in you that you can do this, and let me help you discover the hidden treasures within you, and let me see what we can bring to the table here. I think that is a message that instills hope and confidence rather than despair and hopelessness, which unfortunately some children may have in their home lives. So I think for kids that come from disadvantaged homes or struggle, this provides them a tonic, a sense of relief, a sense of like, hey, this person believes in me. And I think that's a very, very, very important message for a student to get.
And that can help build their resilience, can't it, and their self-confidence and their self-esteem, really, in the world.
All of that. If you're giving if students are identifying ways that they can problem solve, perhaps, that maybe they're not familiar with, then when they face, what is resilience? Resilience is the ability to bounce back from any kind of challenges. And so if you're helping them identify the tools they have to bounce back, that is inherently going to improve their self-esteem, improve their confidence in themselves. And also, one of the benefits, just to take it a step further, is that it enhances the relationship with the teacher and student. So to me, it's like it goes together. Like a strength-based model not only helps kids discover their buried treasures within, let's say, or maybe treasures they're not so they think they have but not so sure how to access, but it also fosters a very strong connection between teacher and student.
And building relationships is, I think, one of the most important things when it comes to teaching. That's foundation for classroom management, behavior management, teaching in general is so important.
100%. I mean, there's a quote by Jim Henson, who created the Muppets, and a puppeteer, and he said once that kids don't remember what they learned, but they'll remember what you are and how you made them feel. And I think that's so true. And even in psychotherapy research, studies have been done. What is the number one variable to promote success in psychotherapy. And even taking into account the skill of the clinician, the number one variable was how the client felt about their therapist. Is this someone I kind of like? Is this somebody I feel a connection with? Is this someone who I feel gets me and understands me? So you are right. You are very right, Tim, there, that the relationship, it all starts from there. It all starts from there. And I'm sure we've all had teachers who we didn't feel very connected with, and our attitude toward those classes were very different than the attitude we had towards teachers we like to go to see. I'll just tell you a personal story. In high school, in secondary school, I was not a good math student. I was terrible. And I had a teacher who I didn't think was very, I tell the story in my book. I wrote a book on using the strength-based approach. And I tell the story in the book that I took a math test in his class one day and I failed. I studied and I really worked and I didn't understand how it, and I went up to him and I still remember it. And see, these events stick with you. And I said, I don't know what happened. And so he says, well, Steve, he says, maybe you should consider a career selling ladies' underwear. And I looked at him, I'm like, is he joking? Is he serious? Well, the effect was, it didn't matter that he said it. And I got home that day and I told my parents, stop the tutor. I give up. I'm not doing anything in this class. And I failed. And I had to repeat it. And eventually I did pass it. Fast forward in college, when I decided I wanted to be a psychology major, I had to take a statistics class. And I was very worried about that class. Oh, how am I going to do this? I was horrible in math in high school. But the first day, this wonderful woman walks in, an older woman. She had to be in her 70s, I think. And she says, look, I know that a lot of you are here because you have to be here. You have to take a statistics class and it's not your thing. But that's okay because we're going to work together. I'm going to be here for everybody. I'm going to help you all. And we're going to be fine. I got an A+ in the class. And I think it was because, honestly, at the time I worshipped this woman, and she really, I felt a strong connection, and she really helped me with the content. But more than that, there was an attitude, like a can-do attitude, I think, that permeated the class. And I think I responded to that on some level, as did several of my classmates.
That's fantastic because it shows that we shape the environment for our students and we create that positive environment for them to thrive in. And we are the orchestra, the conductor of our orchestra, so to speak. So without the skills that we need to help our students to thrive, they're not going to be successful, unfortunately, going forwards, because we're there to help facilitate that and help them to progress and get better. So what are the specific strategies from your book that are effective in terms of helping us as teachers to motivate our students and build those relationships positively?
In my book, I just hold it up here for a moment to show you. Teaching with a strength-based approach, how to motivate students and build relationships. I think it's on Amazon, it is, and it's published by Routledge. And to me, this is kind of a workbook for teachers on how to implement the strength-based model in their classroom. And it depends what you want to do with a student. One of the things I like to do with kids, and I've worked with teachers on, is how to help children identify their strengths. What are they good at? You know, when I see a child and meet with parents for therapy initially, in the initial consultation, I will ask a parent, I will ask a child, you know, what is your son or daughter good at? I'll ask the kid, what are you good at? Because they probably have an idea of the child, like they're there for some challenge. And when I ask that, sometimes I'll get an answer, sometimes I don't know. I can't think of anything. And I'll tell the child, you know, that's okay. Because one of the things we're going to do together, one of the ways we're going to spend our time is to try to figure out something you are good at. Because most people are good at something, and we'll figure that out. And I think it's an important message to give to students in the classroom. So there are different exercises I've done with teachers over the years. Fun things that help children identify their buried treasures, if you will, I like to call it that. One is a mountain of strengths. So you would have a class, and this could be done individually or in a group manner. Draw the outline of a mountain, and at the bottom of the mountain, each day or once a week, however you want to run it, to write something they're good at in the mountain, and a talent or a strength. And sometimes they need a little encouragement. Sometimes the teacher has to give a hint. Well, yeah, there was that math test you did okay on last week, and there was this or there was that. And the goal is to help the student fill up the mountain from the bottom up. And when the mountain is full, this mountain of strengths, the class can then talk about their strengths because there's concrete, objective representation of it, and maybe have a little party for the kids that they can celebrate their strengths. So that's one thing I like. Another technique for younger kids I like to talk about is a strength flower. To get a template of a flower, or they can create one, put the child's name in the middle, and each petal lists something you're good at, some talent. And then after it's done, put them all on the wall so you have a garden of strengths in your classroom. And it's there as a concrete reminder. One of the ways you could have a child draw an award for themselves and have them talk about it, decorate it. What's this award for? What would you have to do to get this award? Have you ever won an award before? What was that like for you? To help kids identify and tap into what they don't know about. There's a commercially available, at least here in the States, thing called a thumb ball, where it is a ball, and each panel of the ball, it's like a soccer ball, has a different category on it. Let's see, something I do well, a discovery that I've made, an example of kind behavior that I've done. And you throw the ball back and forth. There's about 30 of these behaviors or prompts on the ball. And wherever your thumb lands when you catch the ball, the child has to say what it is, a thumb ball. Or you could create your own thumb ball. You can get a blank ball with different, a soccer ball that has a different, segments of it, and just write in something. But have different strengths. One technique I've talked about, or I've suggested to teachers, is I call the index card technique. So you divide a group of children into small groups, and you put a name on every child gets an index card with a name on the front. On the back, each child has 60 seconds to write something positive about the child on the front. And you don't get your own card. You don't do it for yourself. And after 60 seconds, they rotate. And at the end of the exercise, the child who does it at the end has to then put together a little presentation. And for Jimmy, we all thought Jimmy is really good at playing kickball, and Jimmy is very kind to one another, and Jimmy is a really good sharer with his toys, and so forth, just to have a presentation and to build up each other in the classroom. One of the things I talk about too is doing a strength-based questionnaire. So at the beginning of the school year, you can hand children, depending on their age, a questionnaire to tap in. You can have questions like, what are 3 things you do well? What do you think you know a lot about? What have your teachers complimented you on in the past? When in the past you've come across challenges and it was hard for you to complete something, how did you get through it? What did you do? What do your friends like about you? What do people compliment you on, and so forth? And what is something you want to get better at? So it's kind of a nice way. I think it's interesting. You could do it at the beginning of the school year, and then you could do it at different points throughout the school year if you want to compare and contrast and assess how kids are moving and or changing in their perceptions of themselves. So one of the things I like to talk about is helping children develop their strengths. And I give kids a story. I think about 100 years ago, there was an expedition, I believe from England, from a museum in England, to bring Egyptian artifacts back to England. And they found this great big statue in Egypt. And they brought it back to England. And when they when they brought it back to England, they discovered that it was damaged in the shipment. So they had to begin to repair it. And as they're repairing it, they discovered that the statue can open up. And when they opened the statue, inside were these gold statues, smaller statues. And they realized that the big statue was a find, but it wasn't the find. That it was really to protect these gold statues inside that nobody knew about. And so I kind of tried to use that analogy maybe with older kids, that we have treasures inside of us that we may not even know about, that they're hidden by other things. And one of the things we could try to do with a strength-based model is to try to dig a little deeper and find out what are some of those gold statues within ourselves. So that would be like one area that I would want children to tap into, and teachers. And I think, these are fun things to do. They're inexpensive. They don't cost really anything. And I think it yields a big dividend for kids. And the nice thing too is you could share it with their parents. So you could have that positive back and forth between school and home. And maybe parents can be educated about things about their child that maybe they didn't fully grasp, or they had a sense of, and they could see what their child's perception is of it. So that's that's one thing that I write about and I like to share with teachers.
And by doing this, do you think it will help children to be more risk takers? Because I know I deal with kids who are afraid of failure. They would rather not try, or say, I don't know, miss, I don't want to do it, than have a go because they're scared of failing and looking bad in front of people.
That's a very good question, Tim. And the short answer and the long answer. The short answer, I would say, would be, I think it would. Because I think it would help children develop, as we mentioned before, confidence in themselves. If one of the things you're working on, if a child develops, for example, that they have good problem-solving skills, then maybe they begin to think of themselves, good problem-solving skills in one area, and maybe they could be a generalization, to other areas, and they bring that mindset with them. Now, this whole topic you bring up about making mistakes and fear of failure, it's a very, very big problem. I see it with a lot of the kids that I see, both when I was working in a school setting and then privately in my work with them. People are afraid of failure, and why is that? Why does failure paralyze so many people? Well, part of the answer is a biological one, that when we make a mistake, there are certain activities, certain neuron activity in our brains that impact our reactions. So if we make a mistake, interestingly, the neurons can detect it before we consciously do. And when we make a mistake, it activates this neuron response, activates the fear centers of our brain. So the same part of our brain that react when we see like spiders or snakes around us gets turned on, gets activated when we make a mistake. And depending on the child's history and what they've been exposed to, what their mindset is about themselves, it can have a very damaging, very paralyzing effect. I think from a strength-based model, how to deal with mistakes is, I think we have to kind of make it universal for children. I have a colleague and a good friend. His name is Dr. Robert Brooks. He's written extensively on resilience in children. And one of the things he says is, he gives an exercise for teachers. He says, on the very first day of school, teachers should get in front of the class and say, who here is afraid of making a mistake? And the first hand up should be the teacher. And then the teacher could then share, appropriately so, an appropriate mistake they've made. And then you could take it a step further. And you could ask the class, has anybody else here ever made a mistake? And then perhaps you can get children to talk about some of the errors they've made. And that already is, you're introducing it from day one as a normal, everyday occurrence. And then take it a step further. If you get children to talk about some mistakes they've made and their shortcomings, the next question would be, how can we support each other when we make a mistake? What can we do for each other if somebody is having a hard time with something? And can't understand it. So right away, you're making it like a community response early on in the school year. And I think it's very important to make, mistakes seem very universal and part of life. And it's nothing to be feared. It's actually something, we do our best learning from mistakes. I've seen children in school and in therapy, and we talk about how universal mistakes are and how they're made all the time. You could think of instances from like pop culture and history. In the 1800s, the Secretary of State of the United States decided to purchase Alaska from Russia for millions of dollars. And people thought, what is he doing this for? And his name was William Seward, and they call it Seward's Folly. That, oh, he's really blew it. Well, years later, Alaska is now a state, and there's oil in Alaska that could be used. So it doesn't seem like such a mistake, but at the time it seemed like a mistake. So, people will do things and it will come back to haunt them, but it doesn't necessarily mean we shouldn't try. The biggest example I like to use is the Beatles. Before they became the Beatles, they were rejected from Decca Records in London. One of their executives had a choice of two groups that day, to take the Beatles or a group called Brian Poole and the Tremolos. So he opted for Brian Poole and the Tremolos. I think history will show that maybe that wasn't the best decision. But mistakes are just part of being human. And when scientists make great discoveries, what do to verify their data? They try to punch holes in it. They try to find out, is this correct? And they try to question it and manipulate it to make sure it's really correct. And so looking for mistakes can help solidify the results of their research. So in answer to your question, I think it's the attitude, it's the culture that we have about errors and so forth that really is and has to be in place, throughout the school year. And I think, on an everyday level. So if a child makes a mistake, if you're grading a test, and there's a teacher I work with, if a child made a mistake on a test, they wouldn't put a red mark, they would put green. And she would tell the students, green is for go and grow. So let's talk about this. How could we make this a little better? And if a child gives her an incorrect answer, you just don't say, no, that's wrong, next. I'm going, what were you thinking? What made you come up with that? Maybe they don't have a reason, but maybe they do. And there's all different kinds of mistakes. There's big mistakes, and sometimes there's small mistakes where you're just a little off, or maybe you have some of the components of the right answer in there, and other mistakes maybe you don't. So it's important, like when a child makes an error, is there anything within their thought process that is positive, that shows that they were on the right track, rather than just dismissing the entire thing? So that's how one way you can handle errors and mistakes in a strength-based model, by making a child feel like it happens, and there's no shame in it, and there's nothing to be embarrassed about. It's just something that we have to experience and grow from. And that's what we do our best learning. Psychologists will say that the best learning is trial and error. That's how you learn. There was a very famous baseball player in the United States named Willie Stargell. And Willie Stargell was a prolific, he would get a lot of base hits, but he would also strike out a lot. He wouldn't get on base. And there was an interview with him once, and the interviewer asked him, how do you reconcile the fact that you have all these strikeouts, but yet you get all these hits? And Willie Stargell said, those strikeouts made me the hitter that I am. Every time I swing and I miss the ball, I learn something. I learn about something about the pitcher throwing the ball. I learn about how to follow the ball. I learn how to hold the bat. I learn about swinging in the light or the dark. So I take something away from all of those situations that will ultimately try to help me become the best hitter I can become. And he was quite a prolific baseball player. So mistakes are good.
I think that's probably where we're going wrong in society, because we celebrate achievements all the time. We make a big deal about achievements, but how often do we actually celebrate mistakes? And that is what the kids are seeing, and that's unfortunate. That's continuing in society, and we see achievements as amazing things, but we don't actually celebrate the things that are going wrong, and actually those mistakes are learning curves for our kids.
I think you're right, Tam. I think it's missed opportunity. And I think that it's unfortunately a situation where, nice try, but it is a nice try, And, as I'm talking with you, it leads me, there's this concept in education, growth mindset and a fixed mindset. And a fixed mindset is when a person feels that their smarts will take them through everything. They don't need anything else. And a growth mindset is talent is viewed as a starting point, but it's really the experience and a trial and error learning. And people that have a fixed mindset, they're the ones that are afraid to make a mistake. They're the ones that are afraid to try something because it could validate a very negative perception of themselves. A psychologist named Carol Dweck studied this concept, and she did a very interesting study. She got a bunch of middle school and elementary school age children, and she had all of them solve a very easy puzzle task. And at the end of the task, the groups were randomly divided into two, and they were each given one sentence of feedback. One group was told, "Boy, you're really smart to solve that." The second group was told, "You really worked so hard at solving that puzzle." That's all they were told. And then the kids were then offered a selection of tasks ranging from easy to hard. The smart kids, in quote, all opted for the easy task. They didn't want to do the hard task. These smart kids copped out. They didn't want to do it. The kids who were told that they worked hard, they wanted to do the difficult task. And the comments they would make during the difficult task was, "Wow, this is really interesting. I could learn to do something, I never thought of doing it like this." And the smart group who had to do, who were required to do some hard tasks, they would get more visibly frustrated, more visibly stressed. So this fear of making mistakes, I think, comes from a perspective that, how is that going to make me look? Am I going to embarrass myself? But also, how am I going to feel about myself? Am I going to seem less than? And kids believe that their smarts is what gets them to where they need to be. They may not want to do things that are going to challenge those smarts that they may not feel so confident in, because you can't control how smart you are, but you can control how much effort you have and how hard you try. So those children may be more willing to take academic risks, may be more willing to try things that they hadn't. They more willing to try things than the kids in the other group. So it's very interesting in terms of mistakes and self-perception and how this just influences, these may be the fixed mindset kids, may be the kind of kids where teachers would think, he has so much potential, she has so much ability, but she doesn't really push herself. Well, the reason for that may be they're afraid to push themselves because of how that may reverberate internally within them. So they don't. No.
Now, in the UK, and possibly in America, teachers are overworked. They're overwhelmed, they're stressed, possibly burnt out. Yeah. And sometimes we get negativity from our administrators from above. Rather than focus on our strengths, they focus on the weaknesses of the teachers and you to improve this and do this better. And then it's like a ripple effect, isn't it? We then don't react appropriately in lessons, for example, with our students, or we then do the same thing with our students and we focus on their weaknesses instead. So do you think that this needs to filter from above, really, and the administrators need to start having more of a strength-based approach when they're dealing with their staff in schools?
Excellent question. The answer is yes. It has to start at the top. It's not just about a strength-based, I've been talking about a strength-based model in the classroom, but there really has to be a strength-based culture within the school community as a whole. And it does have to start from the top. There has to be a recognition that teachers themselves have strengths and assets, and we have to tap into those. And I think that people who are told what to do and feel negated, that they can't bring their own input to something, it causes despair, it causes frustration. There was a study relevant to this of senior citizens who are in assisted living facilities, and they were given one group was just monitored and followed. Another group were given tasks that included like watering the plants every day, or doing certain tasks around the facility. The mental health of the latter group was much better than the first group. So if you let people do things that they feel they want to do, that they're capable of doing, and they can do, you will see a different mindset of them. And I think a big thing here in the States, I don't know if it is in the UK, for many years it's students had to take tests, and teachers were evaluated on how the students did on these tests at the end of the year. And teacher groups were in an uproar. We're not teaching to a test, and teachers would tell me anecdotally that they had a lot of tricks of the trade they like to use with kids in terms of teaching them how to read, how to be creative writers, how to problem solve, but it wasn't going to be covered on the test. It wasn't going to help them necessarily take these assessments. And why should they spend time doing this? Because it's not, and we need to spend the time, because if they're going to be evaluated, and I understand that these kids have to do the best they can on these assessments. So all their efforts were geared to that. So talk about administrators telling people how to teach when they're not necessarily in the classroom. Here we're having decisions made about staffing and teachers and what kids should learn based on what's on a test, rather than looking at the intuitiveness of the teacher. See, I had this notion growing up, and I still do, that teaching is kind of like a magical event, a magical profession. I mean, really, you think about it. I had a principal in one of the schools I worked at, and the first day of school every year, he would say the same thing to everybody. You are in the best profession in the world. You're in the best profession in the world. He would say that, you can't pick and choose necessarily your students. We have to take whoever shows up at the front door. And that's a challenge, and that's hard, but it allows us to grow as professionals and to experiment and to think and see what we could do for them. How we can connect and reach these students. So I do think that giving teachers a sense of control over what they're doing and having them be able to make meaningful input to decision makers. I think without that, people feel in any endeavor, not just education, they feel alienated, they feel minimized, they're not listened to, and they don't want to work. They feel they can't really work to their strengths because they have to please what other people want. And not that they shouldn't be accountable for what they do, but they need to be introduced. I saw a post on LinkedIn the other day. Why is it that we go for these certifications, advanced degrees, and training, but we're told what to do in the classroom to a large extent? Why aren't we able to impart our own knowledge? And it's a very good question. And it is an issue here in the States, and I'm sorry to hear that's an issue there in the UK too, but I think it's a mindset that needs to be looked at and needs to be changed. And it has to start there has to be an appreciation that from the top down, that, not to be obsessed with test grades. This whole thing about taking a test and how you're going to be assessed, it goes against what a strength-based model is all about. And it encourages a fixed mindset, how good I do, what the outcome is going to be, as opposed to the effort that you put into something. And that, I think, is one of the ways to reduce anxiety for children in the classroom is not to say you have to get 100, you got to pass. They kind of know that implicitly, but to really give an emphasis to the whole process of learning and I think that kind of gets omitted when we say just make sure they can cover that they can get this, cover the material on this test upcoming. You lose something. You lose a lot.
And when students don't achieve those top grades, they instinctively think, well, there's something wrong with me, then I'm not good enough. If I can't get that, I'm not good enough. I've tried, Mrs. taught me, Sir's taught me, and I'm not good enough. And I think we're exacerbating anxiety within our kids because of the education system we have and the testing that we have, which is we're just using one size fits all approach and it doesn't work.
One of the problems here in the States that I'm sure in many countries is anxiety and depression in children and adolescents here in America is at an all-time high. The government estimated that between the ages of 3 and 17, nearly 9% of kids, that's a lot of, no, check that, 17% of, my mistake, 17% of children between the ages of 3 and 17 have a diagnosable mental health condition. That's almost 1 out of 5. That's a lot of children. And the amount of psychotropic medication that has been prescribed and dispensed in America has gone up over 60% since the beginning of the pandemic, of the COVID pandemic here in the States. For ADHD, for anxiety, for depression, any behavioral issues. So kids are really feeling it. And I think you're right. I think that if we're telling them, well, you didn't really, make the cut here on this, or you didn't do well enough, when maybe these kids have been studying so much or preparing, and what is the message we're giving them? That we're not good, you're not good enough. And that just, and also in adolescence, they're thinking about the future, they're thinking about college, they're applying to schools. And that's a whole process as well, taking admissions tests and so on. So it does create, we put a lot of pressure on school-age children. And, and certainly it's not fair to them. And when I was working in the schools for 30 years, I would see how kids, struggled and one of the things I had to do in my school job, I had to do evaluations on children, and one of the thrust of it was the questions I would be asked. Well, what did you find? What are they struggling with? What are they having? What are their weaknesses? But I was never asked, what are they good at? Did you find any assets? Find any resources? And that intuitively, at first, I was a newbie and I didn't quite read the tea leaves, but over time I began, yes, it's true they can't do X and Y, my assessment would show along with my team, but they have potential to do A and B. So why are we just focusing on X and Y? Why aren't we giving A and B the credence that it deserves, the effort, the intention it deserves? So that's how I sort of got into this whole strength-based journey, and wanted to look at children a little differently than how they were being looked at the time.
So if teachers could take just one key message from this episode, what would you like that to be?
I think one key message would be that in psychology there's a concept called a charismatic adult. A psychologist named Jules Siegel wrote about a charismatic adult. And what a charismatic adult is not somebody who is flamboyant or has an outgoing personality. It's an adult from whom a child can gather strength. It could be a coach, it could be a mentor, it could be a parent. Very often it's a teacher. And I think the words that we tell a student, the messages we give a kid, effort is what we're interested in. Making mistakes is part of the game. Learning is a trial and error process. It really impacts how they're going to feel about themselves. And I think if you can give the children a mindset, to help prepare them for success and help them deal with challenges that they can try, and they have a way to think about themselves, I think it's one of the most powerful gifts you can give a student. And there was a quote by a teacher. I wrote it down. Rita Pearson. I thought it was a nice quote. She said, "Every child deserves a champion, an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection and insists they become the best that they can possibly be." So that would be my takeaway to the educators listening, that it can be very exasperating, very frustrating profession at times. And unfortunately, that's just part of the equation. But look for the wiggle room in your work with your children. Look for the wiggle room where you can try to imprint your own skills and strength in a way that can really help a child and help a child begin to see themselves a little differently. I have this idea in my head. It was told to me once by another psychologist, and I like it. If I can help somebody have a day that's 1% better than the day before, it's a good day. So it doesn't have to be 100% or it doesn't have to be a home run. It could just be just a little bit. And I think if you could take that attitude for children and just help them gradually grow into whatever the best version of themselves will look like, that is a gift that they will remember you long, long after they're been in your class. So that would be my message.
It's been amazing to have you on the show today, Stephen. Thank you so much for your incredible insights, your practical tips that will help us teachers and our students to thrive in the classroom and beyond, and to create hopefully a better future for our students and generations to come. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Oh, Tam, I appreciate the forum to talk about some of these ideas. And if people are interested in learning more about my work or my book, I do trainings. The easiest would just go to my website, drstephenbarron.com, or I'm on LinkedIn, Dr. Stephen Barron. And if anybody ever wants to reach out and they have information or questions, I'd be very happy to address it with them.
And these will be in the show notes as well for listeners.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it.